Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, inviting you to join me on this journey. Some lives are shaped by change. Others are shaped by surviving it. But what happens when change isn't a chapter, it's a climate? When displacement isn't a metaphor, it's your childhood. When diversity isn't a value, it's the reason you were hired. And when your lived experience is welcome, but only in theory. Today's guest, Rebeca Ortiz, knows what it is to live in the eye of the storm. Born in El Salvador, arriving in Australia as a refugee, building a career inside international development and diversity spaces that speak fluently about inclusion, but sometimes struggling to practice it. Rebeca is the founder of Studio Quill. She is developing a documentary short exploring sensory memory and displacement. And she's not interested in shallow conversations about equity. She wants them full depth. She is interested in personal power, that we have personal power in belonging, in what gets called diversity and what quietly gets silenced. Rebeca, welcome to Suddenly Different.
Hi, Leigh-Anne. I'm really great to be here. Thank you for that intro. I think it perfectly captures the swirling weather of my life lately and as a whole.
Yes, because it is really, really interesting. Because when we first met, I asked you if you had a suddenly different moment, and I know that most of us have many in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But when you were talking, it was like we were standing in the eye of a tornado or a cyclone. There was chaos twirling around you, but you were very strong in standing still and knowing when to move and knowing when to navigate onto something else, not rushing, but taking your time.
Mm-hmm.
So when did change start being your only constant?
That's an interesting question. I think it's always been and continues to be. I can't actually pinpoint a start, if you will, but rather only because from very, very young, this movement change, the need to switch between identities, if you will, at different times, then going into a profession that also deals with many different people moving into different countries, changes continue always has been. It began, if we want to go to the very, very beginning of my journey to Australia, probably when I was about 3 or 4 years old, when we fled El Salvador to Australia.
Wow. So what size was your family with that fled?
Yeah, so initially there's 5 of us, so 5 children and my parents. My grandmother came 6 months after the fact. I believe it was 6 months. Initially to look after me, but also because of the civil war that was going on in El Salvador, she also wanted to remove herself from the violence, the volatility, you know.
Right. And did you have to go through, well, I gather your parents had to go through some kind of application process. So do you know from stories from them whether you got to come straight to Australia or whether you had to go through refugee camps?
Yeah. So from memory, and this is the thing, this happens with a lot of families who've experienced forced displacement. What I find, I have been doing some digging into this since, sort of coming into a lot of questions myself around why did we pick Australia? What was the process of that? But also now living in LATAM, and I have been for the better part of a decade, there are some questions that I had around the process itself, and also having worked with people who have been forcibly displaced myself. From what I understand, there was a process to apply for various countries once the civil war didn't look like it was going to be ending anytime soon. One of them was the United States. I believe another one was Sweden. Australia was another, and I think Canada. So it was an application, which is very crass to say, but that's essentially what it
Yeah.
was. Where you know, submit the details of the situation, your family, etc. Obviously, the size of your family, how many people would be resettling with you, and all of those sorts of things. From what there's a couple of different versions of what I get, and even more. I got even more versions of what the story was when I went back to El Salvador and had these conversations with extended family members. But from what I gather, the process was actually quite swift. Because we had sent in an application to Australia. This is going to sound awful, to Australia, but I believe at that time, not many people from El Salvador weren't wanting to go there purely because it was so far, but
Oh,
also the proximity to the United States, it just made more sense for a lot of
yes.
families to go there. So my understanding is, due to that and the fact that we were quite a young family and they were quite a lot of young children, we were sort of processed a lot quicker than what the usual timeline is.
Right. Great. And so Australia picked you, and
Yes.
so Australia picked you. So where
Yeah.
did you end up in Australia?
We arrived in Victoria, in Melbourne, but we weren't. I remember bits and pieces. I've had conversations. This is another thing that happens a lot with displaced families, which is another topic that I'm fascinated by, and that is family members remember things very differently, or rather,
Of course.
if you and I experience something, how you feel and how I feel is very different. And so when we relay that to one another, it's, I don't remember it like that. It was actually like this. So this is what I find a lot. There's like a bit of a fog around the memory of this and what it actually was. But we landed in Melbourne. We were sent to a hostel in oh my gosh, Maribyrnong, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were there for it was either 3 or 6 months, and
Yeah.
basically during that time, it was almost like a crash course in Australia.
Yeah.
I'll just I don't really know how else to put it, because what we landed, we had to get all of our shots, children that is.
Yeah.
Check our medical history, check where each of us were as far as the education system back in El Salvador, so that they knew where to place us, I suppose,
Yeah.
in the education system back in Australia. Find out what my parents did for a living. Was there any English? Of course there wasn't, so we had to begin classes to try and enter the system as smoothly as possible. But that's impossible. So
It is.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that. So it was disruptive and confusing and educational, but it was, but and I'm sure that it was done with the best intent. The people who are involved in this
I would agree.
sector are, like they have a good intent, and they are really, I mean, we are such a cosmopolitan country. We have, we open our doors to countries that are in trouble and welcome people in. So yeah, so it's really interesting, and I'm hearing a similar experience for you with your family of not really knowing what happened because you're too busy getting on with it.
Yeah, and there's also one very important thing. I think, a couple of things came up for me as you were mentioning that, Leigh-Anne. I think back then at least, and the messaging that I get from my parents to this day is we really lucked out as far as choosing and being chosen to grow up in a place like Australia, because as far as how we, not that we didn't experience adversity or discrimination or
Yeah.
racism or any of those things, but the degree to which we experience them today as Latinos in Australia, I think, and they say, would be very different, and it would be far harsher if we were in the United States, for example.
Yes. Yes.
So there is that. I will say, I must say, because I've lived out of Australia for so long, I am not necessarily abreast of how the immigration policies are these days from,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there have
Yeah.
been issues in the
Yes.
past.
Yes.
But for the most part, from the memory of my folks, really and truly, there was nothing but an attempt to try and paint a picture for us that would allow us to, as smoothly as we could, navigate a very new landscape. And, that isn't a severe, intense undertaking for anyone. So there is that. That there's a lot to be said for that, because we did at that time, and I do recall certain things myself, some not great, but for the
Mm.
most part, a genuine respect and welcoming of these people who, frankly, were fleeing very, very real, horrific, harrowing violence.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
And I think that because Australia is so large,
Mm-hmm.
right, as a land mass, we
Mm.
can actually be very much in our little bubble and not
Yes.
have experiences with people who are choosing to emigrate, or
Mm.
who are choosing to flee violence. So it
Mm.
is very difficult for us to understand each other's cultures, I suppose. And that
Yeah.
is something that I think is going to flow through most of our conversation, is
Yeah.
that the learning to be willing to learn somebody else's culture,
Mm.
no matter where you are in the world, because having been displaced as a very young child, coming
Mm-hmm.
to Australia, but in your career, choosing to be a global traveler,
Mm-hmm.
right? So choosing to move and to be where you need to be to assist. I think that's really interesting for you to have chosen a field of work
Yeah.
that assists people who experience life like you.
Yeah. And, I think you could dissect this at length for many,
Yeah.
many, many
Yep.
hours. I'm the youngest, so the blunt force trauma, while it was definitely there, I think I had the advantage of how young, I was
Mm,
very, very young. Had I been in my teens, had I been the oldest girl, had I been the one my parents maybe lent on heavily while they tried themselves, because,
mm,
a husband and wife with a family who made the decision to essentially leave everything, every support system that they had, and start anew. I wonder if I were born in a different sort of pecking order, how I might have handled it. My way of dealing with it is to dissect and really ask questions and to unearth and to move and to take my language back and all of those things. But, you know, I think a great part of that, I mention all of that because I think a part of that journey for me has been identifying the need to reconnect with this part of what I experienced as a young person. Because now, as an adult, especially as you growing up in Melbourne, you get friends, you become a teen, you get boyfriends, you move out, you go out, you have work, and then you travel. That part of the beginning of my life sort of, I separated from it for a little while in an attempt to, well, to get along and to keep going, but also uh, to just try and sustain a normalcy that didn't associate me with that
Yes.
experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like, so yes, that had happened to you. And if I'm wrong, please say, but you didn't need
Absolutely.
to wear a big gold badge to say that
Correct.
I started off my life in Australia differently to you.
Mm.
So, like, pay attention to that. You went along and fitted in and did the normal Australian girl things,
Yeah, for a
right?
very long time. Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think even I'm very thankful now, and as I got older, that my grandmother, who for a long time was she took care of me a lot
Yes.
because I was the youngest. My parents were working and siblings were at
Mhm.
school and what have you. So she insisted that we spoke Spanish to one another, but also within the household. Because there was a time, I must say, where I was almost embarrassed to speak another language in front of, peers and what have you, because I thought, no, 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 I'm just one of you guys. I say that because I didn't want to wear it as part of an identity marker, if you will.
Yeah.
But I do think as I got older, especially well into my 20s, I started to understand that it was important to revisit that part of my history, because whether I identify it or not, it is identified for me a lot of the time
Yes.
when
Yes.
growing up in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah. And claiming it, right? So most
Mm.
Australians don't speak another language.
Hmm.
And much of the world think we don't even speak English properly. So, like, I would suggest that um, having the talent and having the linguistic capability of
Mm.
understanding and speaking another language and claiming that heritage is so important
Mm.
for your identity, because it would be sad to turn your back on that. And I know that
Mm.
many people who've emigrated to Australia, the children don't learn their original language,
Yeah, that's true.
right? And it's really sad, because
Mm.
a lot of that formative time of your brain being formed was in your birth language.
Absolutely. And I think initially, because we had to make well, not we, I had to make the switch quickly. As far as I'm talking about my age here and sort of switching
Mm.
from, while I was still sort of forming as a little tiny individual. Um, I think initially learning English was it's survival, obviously,
Yes.
naturally, but also to integrate and to immerse in all of the things. But as I got older, I think an important distinction was I came to realize that protecting the Spanish was also just almost protecting and reiterating the narrative, right? And it wasn't just a survival mechanism anymore. It was a case of making sure that the totality of who I am was and is heard. Um, and on behalf of others too, my grandmother included, who couldn't speak English very well, to make sure that she was heard and what she was saying was heard. I've realized that my whole career as well, that's something what I really look for now is these words, and how do I, if I'm thinking that here in a language, how do I translate that so it resonates not just with me, but also with audiences who may not even understand at all what but also others have been through.
So that is a beautiful compassion that you have developed as a child through your experience?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people learn compassion as a word and a definition and then may spend their whole life trying to experience it. Whereas you've learnt it probably the way it's meant to be learnt, in that it was part of your being from the beginning. So you had to consider a wider range of experiences, and you had to consider others, right? You had to consider others in the decisions that you made. So let us move on to like things that have happened in your career. So over the last 20 years or so, well, as women have become a larger percentage of the workforce, there has been times for you where you've been employed as the diversity member, the diversity. So you tick a few boxes.
Yes.
Right. So if we're looking
I'm
at,
laughing because
unfortunately, I know that I'm probably, what am I doing? Am I generalizing? Am I generalizing from my experience? Because I've worked for 40 years in corporate. So I worked through the low representation of women in the departments that I worked in. So I was, and I didn't feel I had a voice. And I was an Australian, white Australian, and but I had lacking in education. I didn't go to university. So, but I wonder with you what it was like being the token sometimes in rooms.
Yeah, it's a vital conversation. There's a couple of things there. And there's certainly a lot of noise around DEI, ageism, all of those things, especially when it comes to women and how they're treated. I would say, for me, what I found the most disappointing was when we focus solely on the metrics of DEI, ticking a box of this person has these 3 things. That means it's going to look great for us.
Yeah.
Not least for an organization, an INGO. There were many times when I was asked to appear on a pamphlet or give some sort of a soundbite about an experience that was quite personal, purely because it would appear one way for that organization. It would appear to be a good thing for them as far as the people who they had in their teams. But I knew and felt it was performative. So I guess, it felt performative. It felt that it was a tick boxing exercise a lot of the times, and you lose the essence of the person and what that person contributes in their totality, not just because they're a woman of color who's forcibly displaced person working in your organization.
Yes, because when the term diversity, equity, and inclusion started being bandied around, because it used to be equality, right?
Yes.
And then so with the diversity, I immediately thought diversity of thought. How wonderful! We're going to have lots and lots of different experiences and ways of thinking, and values and expertise, and we're going to have this beautiful possible melting pot of ideas, right? So that was my I am an optimist. I'm looking for utopia, right? So I was looking for that diversity to be wonderful, and that everybody would have equality in how they could use their voice, how often they could speak,
Right.
the passion that they could have, all of those things. But very quickly, that stopped, right? Not everybody at the table who'd been included was allowed to share their thoughts.
Correct.
And they were, they only had two emotions to have
Yes.
in sharing their thoughts as well.
Yeah.
And depending on what gender or life preference you had, you were included differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so have you ever been at that that sort of the end where you are deemed to be obstructive or like a agitator?
Yeah, I think it's an important thing that what you mentioned about equality, because that obviously that just assumes, you can come into the room, but then again, it assumes that we're all starting from the same place, right? And I always, it's almost an obsession. I find that I always relate it back to language. There are so many times in different rooms, meeting rooms in Australia, in Melbourne, where even in the NGO space, when I was working in organizations that are global or have programs and do work in different regions around the world, there is an assumption that someone who has a very strong or thick accent isn't as smart, doesn't have as much to contribute, should only be given a certain amount of time because they take too long, because obviously when you're translating in your mind before you say the words. And so that is how it feels a lot of the time. This is why I think I'm so obsessed with how we communicate, because just because you're seen as one thing, because you might look a certain way or because you might speak differently, it doesn't equate to a lack of knowledge. You mentioned you didn't go to university. That doesn't at all mean you don't have a highly sharp intellect or don't have the ability to express something that might be a bit different to how someone else views anything, academically or otherwise.
Yes. And we have all of these. Again, it comes down to a tick box, isn't it? Again, it's like, well, if you speak fluently and with authority, and you do the right body language, and you and you wear the right clothing, and you act a certain way, well, then you are deemed to be the expert. But you may have, like you do, lived experience. You have consciously chosen to do many things that make you far more capable of being able to have empathy, understanding of what someone's going through. And you take time to consider your answers rather than blurt.
Yeah, it's interesting because another thing I thought of when just coming back to the word agitator, I don't think I answered that when you asked me. I have actually been labeled a professional agitator before, which I found so ironic at the time because, again, I was in an organization that was focused on high advocacy, a transference of equity when it came to the pay grade of people who are from a particular place versus expats who are living there and doing the same work. I was just asking a lot of questions about why is it this way for this and not this way for this? could we focus more on this, etc. I was basically asking why that particular organization and many organizations, even the system that surrounds and is entrenched in global development, why our metrics are so rigid, essentially, why they don't match the human reality of a lot of what a lot of people are living through.
And so in asking those questions,
Mm-hmm.
in questioning, because I mean,
Yeah.
the things that, like, what was popping in my mind was, well, of course, if you were
Mm-hmm.
living in um, Bali or something like that, if you're an expat, well, you've got to have a certain standard of living, and
Yeah.
these aren't rules. These are made up assumptions, but they cost more money than a local who is living in probably a more harmonious way,
Mm-hmm.
but costing less. But why should either of those people get paid differently?
Yeah. It's
They
always been a
shouldn't,
really
but they
interesting
would.
thing. Yeah, to unpack and for us to look at, as far as all of us in the sector. I include myself in this because I
Yeah.
was in it for so long. I'm not in any way apart from this. I just felt in the end that it was unfortunate that we couldn't have these conversations with ourselves. And also in the end, I came to the conclusion that agitation, for me anyway, in this case, was just another word for accuracy. You know,
I like
I just,
that.
yeah.
I really,
Yeah.
so accuracy. So you hit the nail.
Well, because it's funny with these organizations and in the sector, we are very ready to sound the alarm and post things all the time about what we deem to be um, not just, unfair, in violation of a particular
Mm-hmm.
right or what have you. But I have yearned for a little bit more self-reflection as far as the sector is concerned, because we should be everybody who is wanting to do something, who is purpose-driven, mission-driven, who works in social justice, or however you call it, we should all be refusing to simplify what this mission is for all of us. Custodians of it, we should absolutely be, which is the truth, the accuracy of all of the nuance and the grey, if we work in different regions, what that means. And that includes people who are in our teams.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because in our conversation, we were,
Mm.
the other day, we were talking about fact and,
Mm-hmm.
and history, right? And what we classify as fact today was not necessarily classified as fact 10 years ago, right? And the history, so that what we take on from generation to generation of the story of how the world was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at a time where books are being banned and burned and history is being rewritten all over the world, different countries in different ways, we then have an issue with that accuracy, right? So how do we get accuracy and advocacy into what we're doing to support people who are sometimes in the worst times of their lives? They have they need the equity, they need the education and the environment to be introduced to them so they can make a choice. because sometimes what we give in education and changes of environment aren't actually the best thing for them.
Mm. Well, I think that's you've just said it there. I think, Leigh-Anne. I think the thing is always, how about we stop asking ourselves and ask the people who are actually involved?
That's right. Because
You know.
because when I
Yeah.
see, when I've been to different countries in Asia,
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen as much joy. I, I, I go there and I see people who are in their daily lives with natural happiness in their faces, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about resting bitch face or whatever, like their resting face was happy.
Mm-hmm.
And and like, I have questioned can they, how can they, live in the environment that they're living in, but be so happy? What have they got that we don't have in here? But I also see much of what it was like in the 70s and the 60s in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
with less restriction and over management, similar to how Asia is today, right? With the
Mm-hmm.
riding on the bicycles or sitting in the back of motor vehicles that, there's too many people. We used to be like that,
Mm.
but 50 and 60 years ago.
Mm. That's a really, yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. One thing, I can't really comment as to the natural state of being of a whole region, obviously, of a whole
Yeah,
continent.
yeah,
There's so much, you know. I think maybe one thing that we try so hard to get all the time, in the countries, or the country that we grew up in, you and I mean,
mm-hmm,
and in Europe, in the US, in the UK, is the answer. We want it. We
yeah,
need it. What is the reason? How come you
yeah,
have this and I don't have this? I think I would never assume, I would never wish to reduce anyone to just one thing, meaning
yeah,
you're happy all the time or you're this all the
mm,
time. It's incredibly complex. Um, I think, yeah, I don't really think about that. What I think about more is our need for the antidote, right? How
yeah.
do I get this? As opposed to maybe out the systems that we're living in, and how maybe what are the contributors to everything, the state of how we all are as a community. Why aren't we so much in community anymore? All of those things.
Well, I know when I visited Fiji about 6 years ago,
Mm,
before COVID, so it may have even been 8,
mm,
they were very worried about the young teenagers, the young people getting
mm-hmm.
onto smart devices.
I see.
They saw the phones as being useful for safety, but they were really worried about losing their community gatherings and
Mm-hmm.
losing their connection the way they had it. They were
Mm,
very, very concerned about the the um, the change that,
mm,
and they had television. Like they had awareness of the world,
mm,
but they were worried about the devices coming in, um, and I think, sometimes life can become far too complex, and in that complexity become isolating rather
mm,
than connecting.
mm. Yeah, there's definitely a lot to the point that globally we're closer as far as, these,
Yeah. Yeah.
but communally, how are we doing? How are we really? What is the temperature check there?
Yeah.
Mm.
So you've decided against probably the prescribed direction of your career, you've
Mhm.
decided to go out on your own. You've
Yeah.
decided that you are going to do it differently. So tell me about
Mm.
that decision that you've made,
Mm.
and after having a full career in the existing sectors, what is it that you're wanting to do now
Yeah.
with your vision for the future?
Yeah. It's listen, the international development sector is there are so many people I have come across who are doing incredible work day in and day out, complex, highly dangerous, often heartbreaking work. For me, what I did find time and time again, though, was just, I guess, the integrity of the translation of the stories of a lot of people and how they were being portrayed, communities of people, whole regions, what have you. Um, it didn't seem to fit all of the granular detail of who these people were. And so for me, the older I got and the more years I spent in the sector, I found that I just kept asking myself, well, what if, you know, I refused to simplify? What if I went at it alone and took on this? Well, it's a passion that I have for, communication, how we get things and how we bridge barriers really. Like, how come you see it this way, but I see it this way? We might
Mm,
actually be saying the same thing, but just
exactly.
the way that we get there is very different. We're watching two very different television shows. How? Why?
Mm,
So ultimately, after a significant, I don't know if it was a wake up call, but I just got really tired of watching the watering down of
yeah.
situations, of people's realities, of the difference in treatment as far as people who are based in Europe versus someone who's based in Guatemala, for example. So the aim was essentially to be almost like that cultural translator, if you will. What I keep saying to myself is it's almost like taking the raw vision of a creator or the idea of someone who is incredibly passionate, wants to invest in a project, not take it over, not run it, rather
Mm,
invest in it. How
mm,
do I take whatever they're saying
yeah.
as crazy or as, pie in the sky as you might want to see it, or as they see it, or as I see it? How do I take that and synthesize it into a narrative that is not just understandable for me and them and all of the philanthropy type friends that they have, but rather someone who isn't from that world, but that message still resonates with them. It still lands.
Yes. And that, is it possible that that's
Mm.
expanding the translation of it to that sensory level as
Mm-hmm.
well, as right? So
Mm-hmm.
because I don't, I don't believe that all we do is hear, right? We have
Mm.
people, we have disabled people who are missing one of their senses, but yet they experience a full experience with
Mm-hmm.
heightened other senses. So if we have a greater
Mm.
translation of the message, right, and we
Mm.
understand and in understanding and unwrapping the core of that message, in the same way that I'm seeking the gold that I've witnessed as a traveler, you know, sharing the beauty of, and the hardship and the fears and the hopes, you know, because we, you know, we don't live in a fishbowl, you know,
You're right.
like, well, although sometimes it does feel like I'm going around in circles. But, you know, we're, you know, we're so culturally different. You've mentioned today to me about, you know, am I aware of what's going on in Mexico? And, well, no, but I'm aware of what's going on in Iran. Like, our media is portraying to us what what higher ups are wanting us to hear. So we're not, you know, we're not hearing about the, you know, the lockdowns in Mexico due to, you know, drug cartels being shut down. We're not hearing about that. But yet, you know, we're hearing about, you know, the interruption to our routes to Europe, you know, like essentially we're being told about the news on how it's going to impact us.
Yeah. It's always relevant to where we are in the world, isn't it, too?
But yet, you know, I'm wondering about the innocents who have been affected by both situations. And then that's only two places, because there's the two of us who have the awareness that we have. But what about the rest of the things that are going on? I mean, we're no longer hearing about Venezuela, about, you know, what's happening there, because that's not on the top 10 list of things to hear about at the minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they can't be having it easy.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talked about this briefly, I think, when we first had our chat, just situationally what we get told and when we get told and the type of things we get told. So it's hard to even decipher and really understand the truth of any situation that's going on.
Well, because it's biased, right?
Yeah.
So it's biased by who's making the loudest noise. It's then interpreted by the media agencies, all the writers from both sides of the spectrum. And then as the audience, we have the methods that we receive information, which we're habitual.
Yeah.
And the, you know, the style of the past, where we would have newspapers arrive at our house every day, and so we would have the opportunity to read about a diverse number of things. Well, we don't have that happening anymore, or not inexpensively. And because everything's about that you know, the scroll.
Yeah.
Everything,
Indeed.
you know, like how, I mean, and because that's going to be one of the things for you with your message that you're wanting. How do you get that message into the scroll pause situation so that people look at it?
I think that's it's an important question. It's a big question. I think the most important thing is, essentially, at the end of the day, how I look at it is, I'm not, and the people who I work with and collaborate with and work for, or what have you, it's not a translation of words really, but rather a translation of values and an idea. So whoever resonates with that, obviously, it will find where it needs to be. I think the most important thing is just sincerity of that message. Obviously, there are strategies and there are things that you need to do to carry out content and all of those things, and they're important. I think the essence, though, is what really matters and lands the most.
Yeah. The truth
Mm.
behind those values and those ethics.
Yeah. And clients want that protected. They want this is my message, this is my labor of love. I've worked for months on this, whatever it is, be it a creative project or a program that they've designed with someone in a different area to theirs. We want to protect it, and we want to make sure that the way that it's being written about is true to what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as individuals, we then interpret those words through our own lens. So it's really, but there is but there's an inbuilt pathway that has already been created. So, but you have got, you're doing such important work, and
thanks.
And it feels to me like you connect to many people at an individual level. And so although you are looking at this massive big picture, right? And you have this huge mission, but you are deeply rooted in the ground. You are deeply connected with every tentacle and web of the people, and which I see that as being so amazing to be. I can just see you as this tree, this with these deep roots, really deep roots that are part of a community under the ground, right? So they're so aged and so definite and so there, but yet, you're reaching for the canopy and you're reaching for the sun, and you're taking all of those messages from that depth out into the world. So if you could change one thing in the way that the sector that you're in behaves globally, what would you shift?
I think from my perspective, it would be it's tough. If we were to relate it back to what we've been talking about.
So
and I suppose what the whole purpose of this launching this thing and what this is, it would be just understanding firstly how we use communication, because essentially at the end of the day, communication is a tool, it's a power dynamic, right? So how we use that in the sector to portray a message of who we are, but also how we are representing others and how we report on the realities of other people, understanding very, very, very viscerally that if it's not our reality and not our lived experience on the day to day, we really only understand, a portion.
So if I could, my understanding of that is treating everybody's story as though it's a blank piece of paper with no colorings on it, and allow it to be written as it is, and then expanding that story so that it is of wealth to everyone, right? Of value to everybody.
Absolutely.
And then if we fast forward 5 years, so where would you like to be and your organisation to be in 5 years? I'm sure you've got a 5-year plan.
I do. It's funny, we were talking about systems and the rigidity of systems, and this
Yeah.
is one thing that I still retain, which is these metrics of time and where I want to be in them. The main thing that I want is just to retain from now until then the precision of what it is I'm doing, which is a precision of the gray, the nuance. It sounds ridiculous, but it's important.
Doesn't sound ridiculous at all. I
Okay.
think you need to lose that language.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's a good point. I will do that. Thanks, Leigh-Anne. I think I would like to see more resilience in systems that at the moment are refusing to be flexible. I also envision a part of this continuing to be the custodian of narratives and stories and content, but also part of a bigger scheme that is community focused, be it community giving or some sort of initiative that isn't just unique to wherever I am in the world, but rather various regions.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I can see that. I can see that. That is all part of that tree that came into my thoughts. I'm reading a book and I didn't know why I was reading it, and now I know. So that's good. So Rebecca, this conversation isn't tidy. It's layered.
No.
It is uncomfortable in the right ways because it's asking us to look at power in a way that's not just representation. It is a way of expression and communication and openness and honesty. And so what I take from you is that it's not about ticking boxes. It's not about rigid metrics, and it is not a photo opportunity. It's about having a voice, belonging with a voice, having the stage, platform, ground to share your message, and being able to speak to power in a way that is heard and listened to. Because we are so often placated.
Yeah.
And as time becomes the thing that is the scarcest, because it is the only true thing that has an end to it, we can find more money. We can print more money. Like, but time, and even though that is an illusion anyway, but looking at time and using that time, we have to become succinct and utilize our words as much as we can, have as many seats at tables or advocates with us. So, it is expanding those seats so there are more.
Yeah.
And understanding when we're at the right table and the wrong table. Right?
Yeah.
So that we can choose to move when it no longer suits the intention and the empowerment of the people who may be living in whatever country of the world, all fighting for the ideal life that they're looking for. So thank you for refusing to shrink and for thinking big and
Thanks,
for
Leigh-Anne.
having the determination that you've had since that little girl who came to Australia such a long time ago and has been empowered to be this global traveller, this nurturer and collator of words of wisdom and the beauty of the voice. So this has been Suddenly Different, where we choose to talk about subjects that are uncomfortable so that we can rebuild with greater integrity, awareness, and humility, and know that all of us are seeking the answer. Thank you,
Thanks, Leigh-Anne.
Rebecca. It's so
Thank
wonderful that
you.
you've shared your story.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I appreciate you, actually. I've listened to a few of your episodes now, and they're quite something.
Thank you. This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.